A business doesn't want to make a loss, what does it want to make?
A doctor who can sell prescribed medicines.
A document protecting people's works.
A list of events placed in time order is usually described as what?
A specialist who repairs leaking water pipes is called?
Historians use evidence to draw conclusions about the past. Would a contemporary artist's painting of an ancient battle be an original source or secondary source?
How many days are in a leap year?
How many days in a week?
How many years does a centennial celebrates?
How would most people travel to work each day, in big cities like Hong Kong, Tokyo and New York?
If a coat had a stain on it, where would you take it?
If you are feeling fed up, is it a positive or negative feeling?
In a recession, does economic activity increase or slow down?
In business and advertising, what does PR stand for?
In medical terms, are antibodies harmful or beneficial for patients?
In the animal kingdom, is the purpose of camouflage to attract a mate, to find food or to hide? Name the month that falls between April and June.
On what geographical location would someone be living if their country is surrounded by water on all sides?
Profit means gain or loss.
Some calendars begin the week on Sunday. What is the other day which commonly starts a week?
The people who protect the public from criminals are called.
There are two types of sporting contests, one is amateur, and other is ____.
To cross over from one side of the river to another without using boat, what is usually required?
To which of our sense do all of the following words relate? Opaque, vivid, brilliant, shiny.
What appliance do people use to keep their food cool and prevent it from spoiling?
What are the people that plant food, raise crop commonly known as?
What are the things that hens lay?
What are winter, spring, summer and autumn?
What do we call a period of 1,000 years?
What do we call a picture that doctors take to see inside our body?
What do we call the first meal of the day?
What do we call the organ in our chest that we need to breathe?
What do you call a list in front of a book which outlines the structure of a book?
What do you call the number of people living in a specific area?
What does a king or queen wear on their head at official ceremonies? What does a sundial measure?
What does ASAP mean? What emergency service is called at sea?
What features do pianos and computers have in common?
What kind of movement of the sun can be seen during dawn? What is a violent conflict between two or more countries?
What is the day that someone is born?
What is the job title for someone who looks after your teeth and gums?
What is the job title for someone who designs buildings?
What is the last game in a sports competition that decides the champion?
When you bake a cake, where do you put the tray into?
What is the name of a system of government in which the people elect their leaders?
What is the name of the field of study that studies the human mind and behaviors?
What is the opposite of positive?
What is the red liquid that flows from the heart to the rest of the body?
What kind of skill can you learn from a culinary school? What is the time period before noon called?
What is the shape in geometry that has three sides?
What piece of equipment shows a person what direction they are traveling to? What plan shows how much money is available and how it will be spent in the future?
What planet do we live on?
What identification document does most people need to carry when they travel between countries?
What do you call a period of 10 years?
What's the place of areas where a college or a university is located?
When you create a table chart, the data in horizontal dimension is organized in rows and the data in vertical dimension is organized in what?
Where do we find urban areas, in a city or countryside? Where would you expect to find equipment like microscopes, bounce and burner, beaker and Petri dish?
Where would you find a whale, tropical forests or in the ocean.
Where would you go to see an exhibition of artworks?
Where would you go to work out on a treadmill?
Which kind of punishment for a crime is the less severe, an imprisonment or community service?
Which section of a newspaper gives the editor an opinion?
Which symbol is used to complete a sentence?
Who is a person that makes bread, cakes and pastries?
Who would you consult to treat a fear of crowded places, a philosopher or a psychologist? Which one of the following is not a mythological animal: unicorn, giraffe, dragon or mermaid?
What is the job title for someone who makes meals in a restaurant?
Which shape in mathematics has the concept of perimeter and diameter?
What do we call the frozen water?
How often is an annual conference held in 1 year?
In the word postgraduate, what does post mean?
Some magazines are published once a year, and some are published twice a year. How do you describe the type of magazine that is published 4 times a year? What is a thermometer used to measure?
When something has increased by triple, how many times does it increase?
Which of the following is not a means of transportation, by plane, by public transportation or car model?
Paper manufacturing results in the destruction of what natural resource?
What do you call a university student who has not yet attained a degree? A new lecture is arriving later this week on Wednesday. If today is Tuesday, when will they arrive? Today, tomorrow or next week?
What building on campus can you borrow books from?
What material is normally used to make windows and light bulbs?
Where on a college campus would a periodicals collection be located?
What is the occupational title for the composer of a novel?
What is the name of a note from a doctor that allows a person to get medicine from a pharmacy?
A sabbatical is a lengthy time away from what type of activity?
What is the profession of a person who repairs cars?
What do we call the 2 holes in the nose, which we breathe through?
What is the first paragraph of an essay?
What is the name of the document that people use to describe their work experience to potential employers?
What do we call a mountain which could erupt?
What liquid do mammals produce to feed to their baby?
What is the name of the room where scientific experiments performed?
What do you often hear immediately after seeing lightning?
What is the term for two siblings who were born from one mother at the same time?
Which star gives heat and light to the Earth?
What is the place you share bedroom with your classmates?
What is the top surface inside the room?
What do we call the lenses which people use instead of glasses?
If someone tells you the truth, what is the opposite?
What is another way to say the arrangement of musical notes in a tune?
How do we describe the food that is not cooked?
What do we call the form of substance between gas and solid? Which part of our body is related to the word optical?
When we say someone is doing the BA in History or Literature in the university, what does BA stand for?
What do we call a place where people live permanently?
What is the opposite of guilty?
What is the barrier that can prevent floods from damaging our home?
What is the antonym of entrance?
What includes everything in the world such as stars and planets?
What does the word TV stand for? What do we describe the space with no air in it?
Who flies an airplane? What's the calendar that follows the movement of the Moon?
What do we call a political institution or body that is responsible for a country?
What is BA for, such as history and literature?
What do we call a short piece of writing containing the main ideas in a document?
What do we call a person who is in charge of a meeting?
What do we call a horse-like animal with a single horn on the head?
What is the room in which you keep things when you don't need them?
What do you pay when you park in a wrong place?
What do we call a person who is hurt in a criminal case?
What do we call someone who studies languages?
In winter, what activities do people usually do on snow mountains by standing on long, thin boards?
What is the joint connecting the foot to the leg?
We call numbers like 1, 3, 5 odd numbers, then what do we call numbers like 2, 4, 6?
Which button do we use to remove something from computer?
What do we call a dream that is very frightening or unpleasant?
What do they call the pieces of puzzle which players try to piece together?
What is the couple's formal relationship called?
What is the term used to describe a period of 7 days?
What is the act of reusing waste materials?
What do you call a word formed from the first letters of other words?
What do you call the people who work on boats?
What does subterranean mean?
What do you call the persons who study religions?
What gas will be generated from the boiling water? What do we call the subject that studies weather and temperature?
What are the first 3 letters of the English alphabet?
What do we call a baby cat?
What is the nominal form of the wide?
When trains or cars need to go through a mountain, where do they enter the mountain?
Where is a criminal kept as punishment?
What do we call a person's move to a more important job or rank in a company?
Which one in the 4 seasons has the lowest temperature?
What is the facilities on shore that monitor ships or communicate with them by radio signals?
What is the pointing device used in a presentation?
What does submediterranean refer to? Whose job is making and repairing wooden objects and structures?
What do we call famous people?
What is the act of jumping into the water?
Where do people go to watch plays?
In the Solar System, which heavenly body produces sunshine?
When you have the primary, the secondary, what do you have next?
What do we call people who write songs?
What is the room that is under the ground floor?
What is the music that is recorded for a movie or a film?
Who is the Swiss greatest scientist in physics?
What is the ceremony called for marriage?
What is the name of male sheep?
What do you need to submit for completing a degree in the university?
Where do passengers stand waiting for a train in the railway station?
What is the most important document you would have to show if you would to hire a car?
What general part of the day is known as dawn?
How do you call a student that has finished his first year?
What do we call the line between a sunset and the sea?
Which day of the week starts with th?
What is the name of ceremony in which two people get married?
What do we call someone who travels and works in a spacecraft?
What do you eat when you are sick?
Which one word is used for a brother or sister?
Which item of cutlery has several prongs, usually 3?
How many years does a millennium have?
What device do you type on when you use a computer?
What do you call a disease which spreads by contact?
What is a word or expression that has the same or nearly the same meaning as another in the same language?
What is the occupation that transfers one language to another language?
What clothing do people wear, such as students or nurses, to show that they belong to the same organizations?
What is the opposite of the word public?
What do you call a person who is guilty in terms of law?
What is the opposite of maximum?
What object do we open a window or a door by?
What do we call a room just below the roof of a house, often used for storing things? What is the scientific study of rocks? What is the connecting part between two bones?
Does mathematics or linguistics cover the study of the relations between numbers?
How many years are there in a half of a decade? If you do something every day, you do daily what?
Which part of the hand do we use to pick up objects?
Language is usually expressed in two forms, spoken and
What do employees get at the end of the month?
What is the payment of a student's education by an organization called?
What is the piece of paper with official information written on it called?
What category do the bee, the butterfly, and the mosquito fall into?
What is the color that refers to environmental protection? What do birds use to fly? What is the horizontal line that separates the globe into two halves? What do you call a person who lives next to your house?
Where do passengers wait for airplanes? What do we call a large building with a square base and triangular sides? What do we call buying and transporting goods from another country? What do we describe an event which happens once every year?
What is the synonym of destiny?
What do we call a person who trains a team in a particular sport?
What do we call the weather conditions like rain, hail, etc.?
What is the three-dimensional shape of circle?
What do you call a person that can't hear?
What do we say if we call brothers and sisters in a same way?
What do we call the phase in a trial in which both parties interrogate each other?
What do we call a table showing days, weeks and months of a year?
What do we call the musical instrument which has 6 strings?
What type of body covering helps to insulate burns?
What is the generic term for a person who once had the same title as you have now?
What do you call the hair that grows above your eyes?
What is the opposite of the minus sign?
Which continent is Canada located in?
Where does a pilot sit in an airplane?
What do we call a slight shaking movement in a part of the body?
What is the straight line between the center of a circle and any point on its outer edge?
What do we call a statement presented in court by a defendant or a lawyer?
What part of the body propels a flying bird in the air?
What is in the opposite direction from the head?
What is the opposite of the word import?
What do we call the people who live next to you?
Where do we make our cars?
What is the round, yellow part in the middle of an egg?
What do we call the behavior of not buying products from an exact company as a way of protesting?
What do we call a collection of large quantity?
What are breakfast, lunch, and dinner examples of?
What do we call the state of believing in oneself?
What do we call the clothes that need washing?
What is the opposite of negative?
What do we call the component of a camera that should be developed in darkness?
What is the general term for painting at countryside or natural view?
What is the opposite direction of northwest?
Which number does the root OCT indicate?
What sport event was originated in Greece?
Where do teachers sit at the university?
Where can we read a book electronically?
What is the yellow stuff that can be found on beaches or deserts?
What do we call the state of having a lot of fat in one's body?
What do we call a person who thinks only for himself or herself?
What will students receive at the end of the term?
How do we call the people who study animals and plants?
What unit do we use to measure temperature?
Which is the season of the year when plants start growing again? What drink do people get from cows?
When you make a cake, what do you stir in the milk?
What do you call the clothing actors wear on the stage?
What do you call the money you pay to use a road or a bridge?
What do we call the opposite to the end of a story or a book?
What do you use to dry your body after a shower?
What do you call a country where there is no king but a president?
What do we call a person walking in the street or in a crosswalk? What is the opposite of groom?
The sense of hearing will allow you to hear. Then what sense will allow you to see?
What do we call a liquid that is used for washing hair?
What do we call the cool area under a tree?
What is the time after noon called? What piece of equipment would you use to go diving in a sea, an aquaplane or an aqualung?
Which of the 5 senses are you using if you detect the odor of gas in a laboratory or in your kitchen?
What do you call the food made without applying chemicals or artificial additives?
What's the name of the company that produce books?
What is a man-made river called?
What kind of knowledge do scientists believe in, subjective or objective?
What is the opposite of ending in a film or movie?
What order is a bibliography usually listed in?
What kind of educational institution does a 10-year-old child study in?
What are the 5 things in front of your foot?
What is the thing which we use for painting and is made of hair?
What do we call dollars, cents, pounds and euros?
What is the description of events that is spoken with background music during a film or a play?
What is the device that controls electrical appliances on and off?
What do we call people who work on ship or plane? How do we call the young horse?
What do you call the son of your sister or brother?
How do you call the device that produces electricity?
How many quarters are there in a calendar year?
What do we call a person who writes a book?
How many sides does an octagon have?
How do you call the money that you pay in advance for receiving newspapers or journals?
How many years are there in a century?
We call a person used to using the right hand a right-hander. And what do we call a person if the left hand?
What do we call 3 children born at the same time to the same mother?
What do you call a picture or design permanently on your skin made with a needle and ink? What is the storyline or the series of scenes of novels, movies, short stories or plays?
What is the process of choosing a person for a position by voting?
What do we call the extra working time?
What is the opposite of forward?
What do you call the substances used to speed up a chemical reaction? What do you call a doctor specialized in eye treatments?
What do you call a difficult time when economic activities slow down, and there are more people unemployed?
What is the process of moving information from a computer to the internet?
What do we call the animals that live in the sea?
Where do weddings happen?
What is the huge truck that contains oil?
What day is the first day of a week which starts with T?
What do you call something that can be carried easily, portable or cumbersome?
What is the part of a river where it joins the sea?
What do you call a person who is 100 years old or more?
What is the phrase used to describe the way something repeatedly increases and decreases?
What is the short sleep in the afternoon? Who test eyesight and sell spectacles?
What do you call a string of beads used for counting prayers, rosary or garland? Which one deals with rules of language, grammar or literature?
Which one means, not limited, infinite or finite?
What can you see in a mirror or still water surface when facing them?
What is the most important part of the human respiratory system?
What document does a student get when graduating from the university?
Where will you go when a crime happened to you?
What do you call an animal that hunts for food or preys on other animals?
What is the verb describing the process that water becomes ice? What do we call one of 4 equal parts of something?
What do people with claustrophobia fear?
What animal is a shepherd responsible for?
If you are celebrating a biannual activity, how many years ago did you celebrate it last time?
What do you call the people who visit sightseeing locations?
How do we describe a person who is educated?
What is the study of plants?
Is a short sleep in afternoon a siesta or a nap? What is the opposite of even numbers?
What is the taste of foods called?
What is the warmest part of the Earth's surface called?
What do you call a person who is suspected by the police?
What vehicle runs on railways?
If a flight is not international, then what is it called?
What is the opposite of dangerous?
What do you call your nephew's dad?
What part of a plant has petals?
What instrument would you use when you want to weigh something up?
What do we call the joint that joins the leg to the rest of the body?
What is the process in which a doctor finds out the illness?
What do we call the document in which a political party announces their plans before elections?
What is the process of breaking down plastic and glass and using it again?
How many days are there in 1 year?
What do we call a person undergoing treatments in hospital?
What flight starts in a country and ends in the same country?
What is the opposite of horizontal?
What revolves around the Earth?
What do we call a list of the times when classes in school happen?
What are the imaginary lines that run around the Earth vertically?
What do we call a large notice or picture sticked on a wall? What do we call a player who is going to replace another one on the field?
What does MBA stand for?
Who prescribed patients medicine?
What do workers get by working overtime?
What do we call a person whose job is cutting up and selling meat?
Where are you going if you are in a downward direction in a map?
What is a strip of hard ground along which aircraft take off and land?
What do we call a person who lives permanently?
What do we call the device with two or more blades turning quickly to cause a ship or an airplane to move?
What do we call a scientist who studies planets and stars?
What do we call a fear of large and open space?
Who prepares and sells medicine in shops or hospitals?
What is the literature that withstands centuries?
What is the name of rugby sportswear?
Who serves and helps passengers in a plane?
When a runner runs, what is this state of breathing?
How many sides is a peninsula surrounded by water from?
If a student fails to show up in a class because of illness, how do we describe it?
What do you press at the door when you arrive at someone's home?
What do we call animals which eat meat?
What do we watch with a screen and a projector?
What is the final step of a bakery?
What day comes after Monday?
What do we write on blackboards with?
What do we call the action of giving money to influence someone in power?
What do we call the type of energy that uses uranium to generate electricity?
What do we call a person who writes and checks financial reports?
What subject studies the science of animal behavior?
What do we call the thing that covers a bride's face?
What do we call a man who is getting married? What's the grey thing in the sky when it's about to rain?
What do we call the long, orange thing that grows underground?
Ears are for hearing. What are eyes for?
What do we call the party in power?
What do we call the phenomenon that a volcano throws out lava, ash and steam?
What do we call a machine which carries people from one floor to another in a high building?